Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are changing the way business happens and making an impact in their communities. I'm Tyler Kelly. I'm one of the hosts of Innovation City, and today I'm coming to you from our Slam Agency St. Louis library. And today we're featuring our number 12 interview of all time. It's an exciting one out of Miami, Florida with Natalia Martinez. She is the CIC General Manager and Latin American lead. And in this clip, she talks about her mission for making entrepreneurship accessible to all communities. And she also gives some really good advice for those of you who are looking to start your own business. Let's check it out. I was reading an article that you wrote a while back ago, and you say in it that entrepreneurship is the best driver of economic development, I believe. Or I'm paraphrasing.
Probably, yeah.
So tell me about that, just how, because you say, you know, the money is not necessarily in innovation or startups because maybe it's not the safest bet. Mm-hmm. But innovation, startups, entrepreneurship is what's driving economic development. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think of entrepreneurship as an economic development tool. I think it comes with a lot of complexities associated with that. So if you think about making entrepreneurship accessible, for example, making funding accessible to people of different backgrounds and socioeconomic class, and kind of mindset. And by mindset, I mean kind of entrepreneurship by necessity is very different than entrepreneurship by choice, mm-hmm. right? So an immigrant or first generation American who is trying to kind of feed their family and opens some sort of business has a very different mindset and priority set around how they're scaling or expanding or what risks they can take than someone who has the luxury, and I mean that not in a bad way, but kind of how great, but someone who has the luxury of having access to more capital, either through connections or family or et cetera. I see a lot of this divide because I had the distinct pleasure of going to Harvard and then to Columbia. And so most of my peers are people who have access to this kind of funding. And it's been wonderful to see their ideas go so quickly from kind of starting point to fruition because they're able to pull so many of these levers. And so when you think about, well, what if you didn't have those? What if you're, in our case, CIC Miami's in Overtown? What if you're a young adult in Overtown who has some really interesting ideas about things that are relevant to your community or your subset of the population or just in general for society? Where do you go with that? And so if you have avenues of accessing resources around that, whether they be mentorship, capacitation, skills training, funding, of course, all sorts of the kind of the meat that allows you to turn, I've had a thought, into this thought is moving forward into something real, that's a node gets created around that because you have a person who's empowered, you have an example that is set in a local community around kind of the power of entrepreneurship and the relevance of that. You have jobs that are created. You have kind of societal improvements that are coming that are traced kind of in a particular way. And so I think it's making entrepreneurship accessible and not just kind of helping entrepreneurs scale, but making the original kind of the starting point of entrepreneurship accessible can be an incredible way of driving economic development in a way that is sustainable and inclusive. Across very different types of communities and subsets.
Let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm in the innovation space, or maybe even an investor. What advice do you have to someone in this whole ecosystem? Maybe that either CIC can help with or just from your own personal experience?
So, I mean, from the CIC perspective, we spend a lot of time and energy and effort trying to engage around these topics. So I would say there was a lot of avenues, some of them at CIC, some of them all over the city, of finding peer groups, of joining communities of interest, of upskilling if you're interested in kind of exploring something novel that is new to you. There are definitely kind of avenues and opportunities for that. And so I would first and foremost say seek those out. Obviously, Venture Cafe is an incredible example of that because of the kind of amount of programming that happens every week and that's free, but there's, we have a lot of other events that happen obviously at CIC as well, and there's a ton of other programming around South Florida. So I would say kind of seek those things out to learn and to improve. The big thing that I say to entrepreneurs is to not get pigeonholed in this idea of in this feeling of being a big fish in a small pond. And so I have many conversations with entrepreneurs where the metrics that they use to look at the success of their early success of their business is based on kind of Miami magic. And so they're like, well, everybody loves me, and all my cousins invested in this, and all my friends know about it, and like that's wonderful, that's great. But we're still a small ecosystem, and so there is this you feel like you've made it in a sense, but really there's a long way to go. And so I push entrepreneurs in South Florida to really think about, from day one, think about a larger market. So what does it look like for you to be a US company? What does it look like for you to be a global company, and to go in that direction? For investors, I would say, well, first of all, I think we need more investors. So Aminta Ventures, which I co-founded with a handful of friends of mine and wonderful kick-ass women, is focused specifically on activating more female investors. So taking women who are more experienced either in their professional endeavors or who are very kind of deeply committed to the city and generally exercise that commitment through philanthropy, and getting them to really consider angel investing as an avenue both of kind of diversifying their financial portfolio, but also of community impact. Because angel investing, because of the size of the checks and because of the stages of the companies, does have an element of it that's kind of like, well, we'll see. Like, I sure hope I get some money from this, but I don't really know. So you kind of have to buy into this larger mission of, especially if you're investing, in a region first, maybe not exclusively, but first, you have to buy into this idea that investing in companies and investing in entrepreneurs is a driver and is a benefit for themselves and for the community. And so we started that largely because we were finding that it's not that women weren't interested in investing, it's that they felt like there were other things at play. So they felt like they couldn't show up in the room, and they didn't know a lot of the terms, they weren't sure what to do. It's not the most friendly environment to ask a question in the middle of an angel meeting pitch session. And so the idea was, the goal is the same. So the goal is, how do we have more investors in the rooms where viable companies are being pitched and feedback is being given? But if women need a different on-ramp to those rooms, then let's create a different on-ramp to those rooms that allows them to have some educational opportunities, some perhaps softer entry, smaller investments that they can play around with, some mentorship, et cetera. So that's what we did. So my take for investors is really, my advice for investors is really kind of take your time to really kind of look through things locally. I know a lot of investors who are here who invest in a lot of stuff outside of the state, which is wonderful, and we want them to do that. But kind of make sure you're fully aware of all of the great companies that are coming out of South Florida, because I think that's important. And kind of mentor other people, which I don't think always happens. So mentor other people who want to be investors and who are interested in investing, because we need more of them. And the more investors we have locally, the better case study we can prove of the viability of our companies here and the strength of our ecosystem. And kind of third, offer more feedback to companies and kind of go through the process of mentoring companies. It's not always fun. It's not pleasant. It's very time consuming, but it is, I think it's really critical to honing and improving and really kind of making the companies that we have in South Florida more robust. So that's kind of my advice.
That was a great clip. Natalia is a wonderful person. And if you've enjoyed this interview, this show, then go ahead and rate, subscribe, and review our show on iTunes or anywhere where you listen to a podcast. And be sure to share it with a friend. Thank you for tuning in, and big thanks to Venture Cafe Miami and St. Louis for partnering with us to bring this show to the world. We'll see you next week.